Managing Violence Podcast, Season 4, Episode 5, with Deane Lawler. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to the Managing Violence Podcast. My name is Joe Saunders. I'm your host each and every week as we interview some of the best and brightest minds in the worlds of self-defense, managing violence, combatives, psychology, the works. Yeah, anything to do with violence, that's our jam. If you're here for the first time, thank you, and thank you to all those that I asked to share the podcast this week. I hope we do have some new ears listening in. Make sure you check out our back catalogue for some of the biggest names in the industry. We've been very blessed to have some very smart people on this podcast, making me look better. And if you're new to the show, you may not be aware that we have a Patreon at patreon.com/managing violence, where you can sign up for as little as $2 a month. We have $2 a month, $5 a month, and $10 a month options with varying perks, including early access to episodes, bonus content, and quite often that bonus content is almost as good or better than the interview itself. We're talking about nearly half an hour of bonus content on some episodes. We have, a bunch of stuff. We got good stuff. Go pay money, get more stuff. That's the way life works, yeah? Yay, capitalism. Anyway, check out our Patreon, www.patreon.com/managing violence. Also check out our YouTube, check out our Facebook, check out our LinkedIn. We're pretty much everywhere. If you're into more stuff like this, go follow us on social media or check out my website at www.joesaunders.com.au. Now today I am joined by Mr. Deane Lawler. Deane is a legend of the Australian martial arts. I've tried to focus on a few more Aussies this season. I had Ray on earlier, got Deane Lawler on now, and look, if you haven't heard of Deane, you're doing yourself a disservice to not look him up. He's got some really good content out there on YouTube, mostly from other people. He hasn't promoted himself a lot over the years, but if you're in the Australian martial arts, you probably know who Deane Lawler is, and he's a bit of a legend. He's famous and infamous in equal measure, a real hard man, a very intense individual with a very real and an apparent connection with violence in his life, and it's really interesting to hear his story. I've shared many a coffee with Deane over the years, and it was great to actually hear the background of what made Deane Lawler the man he is. So without further ado, here is the man himself, Mr. Deane Lawler. Deane Lawler, thank you very much for joining us on the show, mate. It's great to catch up with you. It's been too many years since we last spoke.
Yes, it has. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, Joe.
Oh, it's my pleasure indeed. Deane, you are a name that is equal parts recognised and not recognised. It's kind of an interesting space, because those of us that know, especially here in Australia, know who Deane Lawler is, but those of us who aren't in the know probably never heard of you. So I think this could be a really interesting show for those that have never heard of Deane Lawler. You may have seen the video that went viral that he was in from AIM Academy a few years back with Realities of Knife Defense. I'll put a link to that. But Deane has a hell of a story when it comes to martial arts and violence, and I just really wanted to, one, sit down and actually hear the story for myself, and two, record it and send some publicity his way, because he's a pioneer and deserves some recognition.
Well, thank you, Joe. I don't know if I'm class myself as being famous, more infamous, I think. And,
if you know, you know.
And I think by the end of this interview, I think I'm pretty sure I'll have a few more enemies. We'll see what happens.
That's okay.
But, I've always found myself to be outspoken in this subject. The main reason why I've always taken personal defense to heart. I come from a very, very poor family. I had great parents, but unfortunately, my father had issues. So we came from a house full of domestic violence. It was quite scary as a young kid. To give a quick example, it'd be very much like Monday to Thursday, we were the greatest family in the world, and I couldn't ask for better parents. Come Friday afternoon, if my father hadn't come home by a certain time, we knew straight away that he's at the pub, and the anxiety would kick in. my mum would send us to bed, and then we knew straight away that there's a good chance there was going to be a fight that night or some type of violence. So one of my main motivators when I was younger was because I was terrified of my father, and being the eldest of four boys, was always there trying to protect my mum. So the interests of at the time in those 70s was when the whole kung fu, Bruce Lee, David Carradine thing came around, and it really, really caught my interest. So I suppose my earliest hero was not Bruce Lee, like a lot of martial artists and reality-based guys. My first hero was basically David Carradine. I really, yeah, I know it sounds funny. I hope I don't end up like him. But, but the fact is that I really like the fact that he could walk through a desert with no shoes, go into a town, walk into a bar, ask for a cup of water so he could have a cup of tea, and then he gets picked on, he kicks everyone's ass, and then bows everyone, says thanks for the water, and leaves. And all done in the act of humility. And I thought, well, hey, that's the guy I want to be. I found Bruce Lee to come across with a little bit of probably arrogance is not the word, but maybe a little bit too flashy for what I was keen on at the time. So I suppose because of my environment, I grew up to be very pragmatic, very logically thinking of what can work and what can't work, and seeing the reality. Now you got to understand is that domestic violence is a horrific thing for a lot of people, and now I don't want to harp on it too much, but one thing I did in my life then was never use it as a crutch, never use it as an excuse not to achieve anything. If anything, I always use it as fuel to the fire to become successful at things. So I use it as a motivator, which is a big plus. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So in turn, doing that, I was always keen on this self-defense aspect. I did get involved earlier in the competition. I boxed, I did judo, I did taekwondo, I did karate, I did a whole lot of different things as a young man. I competed quite well. The only problem I had was that I was a chronic asthmatic. So being a chronic asthmatic, it made it clear that I was probably not going to have a world championship career, not being able to breathe appropriately. I still remember the ringside doctor when I was a teenager. After a few fights, looked at me because I used to use my excuse was I had bronchitis that day when I got the medical exam. I come out after a few fights and he said to me, I think you're going to have to start looking at that bronchitis. It might become something serious. So I think he gave me a nudge, wink, wink to say, I've really caught on to your stories. So I kept trying. And so my style of training was based on power and speed to get rid of the opponent as quick as possible. So I suppose, again, a product of my environment and my physical health, my style developed around that, and in turn, my teaching developed around that.
So you're actually mixing styles and arts from a very, very early stage. It wasn't something that you went into later in your career. It was more something from the beginning. You're always mixing.
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I started teaching when I was 16 because I still remember my phys ed teacher telling my mother and father at a parent and teacher night, listen, Deane's a fantastic athlete, which I was a sprinter and a jumper and everything at school, a very power athlete. And he said, but can you please tell him to stop teaching people sidekicks in my class? So right from the beginning. And then when I turned 18, I was teaching a lot of guys that were like double my age and so on. And I was experimenting with anything and everything under the sun. Look, I've had a charmed life to the point where I've been very fortunate. Anyone I ever looked up to, I actually ended up running into and training with over the years. And I'm a great believer in fate. And I honestly believe that I was meant to meet these people. So that was a big plus for me. And I think the people that I did run into were always very pragmatic. I didn't run into the usual movie stars and those type of people. I ran into people that had some type of combat background that could be verified. Something that where they were known in that particular area. The Filipino martial arts is probably a great story to tell. I was interested in the Filipino martial arts with the stick and the knife and everything, and I thought it was great. I hadn't really seen anything that made me think it was fantastic.
You got into the Filipino martial arts quite early, didn't you?
Very early.
What year was that?
Mate, I started training with a guy called Max de Corvez, but I think that was his style that he did. He was a little Filipino sailor, and I did a lot of knife work with him for a couple of years. And then I ended up training with Kako Kenyedi and another guy called Carlos Navarro. Now, everyone has the Mr. Miyagi story. Well, here's my Mr. Miyagi story.
All right.
And it's hard to believe, but it's a true story. I had Kako Kenyedi stay in my house in the mid 80s, and he was a wonderful old guy. And to this day, I miss him dearly. He's passed away now. Him and I always got on famously, even though we didn't spend a lot of time together. And then there was a story going around that he had a fight, a full contact fight, a fight to the death, basically. The last fight with no headgear, no pads, just with sticks, the challenge match. And a friend of mine contacted me and said, listen, I've seen this old guy in the backyard, a little Asian guy swinging sticks around, and I think you might be interested. So I've rocked around to this place over at Newstead in Brisbane. And lo and behold, here's this guy called Carlos Navarro. And I started training with Carlos, and Carlos was a very combat orientated in the Black Eagle system at the time. I started training with him, and lo and behold, he was the guy that challenged Kako Kenyedi for the last fight.
Wow.
So there you go. So I ended up training with the two guys that had the last big punch on. So, so in turn, it was quite fantastic meeting with these guys. And those two, both of them were very pragmatic as well in what they did. So in turn, they gave me the basis. So I've never been into the flowery Filipino martial arts. I couldn't get into these drills and flow drills and that type of stuff. It was all about the combat for me. It was the same when I was boxing and got into kickboxing. And, as much as I wanted to be a champion at something, I knew, physically I couldn't. So I tried to jump in and try to get rid of the guys as quick as possible in everything I jumped. So I entered everything. I entered point fighting. I remember entering a point fighting competition in the old FOCO days, and I had a gi on that had just come out of a plastic bag. It still had the creases on it, and I must have looked like a dead set bum. Looked terrible, just so because I wanted to enter and compete in anything I get my hands on. So my brothers and I would compete pretty much almost every weekend in any competition we get our hands on, just to see what we could test out and what could work and what couldn't work.
Yeah, that explains a bit, actually, because I remember when I first met you, and I was sort of coming across your name everywhere, and from point karate to Filipino martial arts, boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, you're everywhere. And I thought, how old is this bloke? He's done everything.
Well, I think a lot of people forget how old I am. Look, I'm only 58, I suppose, but a lot of people don't realise I've been involved training since I was about 12. So, I know people have been in the boxing community from a very long time ago. I was at the inception of kickboxing, basically, back in the late 70s, early 80s, when they had the PKA, when people were kicking 8 kicks above the waist per round.
Yeah, the long satin pants.
Oh, yeah, and I had those pants,
You still do?
Yeah, well, I still remember when the boxers started coming to the kickboxing because the money was a little bit better, and you'd hear the people in the corner, okay, that's 3 kicks. Throw another 5, 6, 7, 8. Now punch him. So, that's pretty much that was how kickboxing was originally.
Yeah.
In between that, I was studying as a engineer. Not studying, but working as an in-house engineer within the automotive industry. And I started bouncing. My dad got me a job when I was 18 with a guy who he knew. My dad, to give a background on my father had a bit of a reputation of being one of the boys around town. So unfortunately, I was a little bit overshadowed by his name in some ways. And they used to tell me, "You're Dick's son." "Oh, yeah, no worries, we'll give you a job." And so when I started bouncing in pubs, you got to understand, I was 18. I was about 62 kilos, and I looked like, what can I say? Who was the guy from the Karate Kid?
Ralph Macchio.
I look like Ralph Macchio from the Karate Kid. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I pretty much I'd probably dress like him too. And so I was always the target of usually anybody and everybody. But over the years, I gained a lot of knowledge from that, and the bouncing work at the doors really opened my eyes to reality of the world. I think the advantage I had in that game was I was always used to this spontaneous violence, because of the family background. So when people would arc up at me, it never really shocked me. And if anything, I tended to go very cold. And so I could relate to it very, very easily.
I imagine you probably had a very finely tuned filter to be able to determine whether something was going to go physical or not as well.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Look, my honest opinion when it comes to bouncing, I think that if you spent your training years working by yourself, then when you start working with a team, you become one hell of a crowd controller, one hell of a bouncer. You learn to use your brain. You learn to use strategy. You learn to verbally de-escalate things. And then if you do have to punch on, well, then you need to have those necessary skills. So you gain my dad used to call it a quiet sense of confidence. And I think it's that look that gets, when you meet someone that you sort of go, well, yeah, he seems like a nice guy, but I don't think I'd want to fuck around with that bloke. And I think that's a good thing. I used to always work the idea that if it was a big guy on the front door trying to get in, and he was getting a little bit argumentative, I'd always make him give him the impression, yeah, you could beat me, but man, you're going to get the shit kicked out of you trying to beat me. You're going to get really, really hurt. Yeah, you'll beat me in the end, but do you really want to get hurt and then go home with nothing, or do you want to come in and get lucky with the girls? So that was very much an attitude I tried to keep lots of times when working that front door.
So it must have been a kind of an interesting progression for you, because you've gone from a violent and volatile childhood through to reaching a high level in a variety of martial arts, at least a high level of competency anyway. And then being back in a reality of a violent reality, having to prove yourself all over again, but now with some skills under your belt. How was that transition? Was it just sort of a natural thing for you? Was there a contrast? Did it stir up anything for you?
Yeah, I think it was a personality thing as well. Look, I'll be honest with you, I really didn't like competition. Competition used to scare the living hell out of me. But a street situation did the exact opposite.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I used to tell everyone I would get scared, and then I would turn that fear into anger, because I'd get angry at myself for being scared. And I'd go, you bloody weak bastard, what are you doing? You bloody wake up to yourself, that type of thing. And then I would turn that anger into controlled aggression, and then utilize it effectively for the situation. So in the end, it worked out very, very well for me. Don't get me wrong, I don't profess to be a tough guy. I'm certainly not a tough guy, and I wouldn't say I'm a great fighter, but the advantage I have was that when people worked with me, my reputation was that if you worked with me, you got home safe. And I think that's really all I ever wanted to achieve. As far as the violence is, dealing with people, look, I think people are predictable in lots of ways, the way they stand, the way they act, the way they move, the things they say. You got to understand there's a lot of fear out there. I honestly believe the fear is the basis for a lot of the violence around town that you see. Fear of losing, fear of being embarrassed, and so on. So I think you see a lot of this. There's a gentleman by the name of Edmund Burke who made a quote back in the 1700s, I think around about 1790. And he said that no passion effectively robs the mind of all its powers of acting and reasoning as fear. And I really liked his description of fear as being a passion. And I honestly believe that's what it is. I hate it when I hear people giving emotions some type of essence, some type of image, some type of sort of turning them into a demon of some type, or an object. People talk about suicide as being the black dog. And I don't think so. I think you got to look at it that fear in those situations really is just an emotion. It's something that. Well, here's an interesting. It's like if you get anxiety and they give you medication for anxiety, that medication basically just stops all the what can I say? What's the things that happen to you when you're anxious. You know, it slows down your heart rate a little bit. It cuts out the sweating of the palms and so on. So in the end, you don't have the symptoms of it. That way, then the mind can control the anxiety a little bit better. Well, that's how I like to look at fear always when it comes to the street sense. So when we're training, a lot of my training is based on a kinesthetic model rather than an audible or a visual model, which I find a lot of martial arts are.
Yeah, it's actually an interesting conversation to have with you because, yeah, for listeners to be aware of, I've had the opportunity to train with Deane a number of times over the years, and one of the things that I always admired about the way you teach a seminar or the way you run a class, especially if we're talking about a quote unquote reality based self defense or a self defense based scenario, is that you've got a way of injecting an intensity and a realism that a lot of other instructors just don't. You can design a scenario and you can add layers. You can do all sorts of cool stuff with it to make it closer to reality. But there's something that you bring to it with that pure sort of emotional intensity. I just wonder, was that something that you sort of came across naturally, or is it something you worked to develop?
Look, probably a little bit of both. One of my pet hates, one of my pet hates in martial arts is, especially reality-based stuff, is when I see a big tatted up guy and he's telling everyone this is how you fight in the street, and he's a former bouncer, and you understand is that in the bouncing situation, if you haven't worked the door for a minimum of 5 years, you haven't worked the door. That's an old school thinking. But when I hear people say, yeah, man, I work the doors, and I go, how long did that for? They go, 6 months. I said, well, that's not working the doors, that's a comedy show. 5 years minimum. I've worked the doors now I don't work the doors anymore. I've got people that work for me. But I've probably been in the skill industry now for nearly 40 years. And so when I do seminars and when I see these guys teaching this stuff, they tend to treat people like they're punch bags. And they stand there and they throw all these super fast and explosive techniques. And I understand, technically wise and physically wise, these guys look great. But I don't really think that's the way to teach people, because these same people then denigrate traditional martial arts. But really, all they're doing, they're just wearing a different uniform. They're doing the same thing as they're just doing the same thing as a karate class, as a taekwondo class, a kung fu. They're just demonstrating on these techniques on a model that's not doing anything, that's not moving, that's not giving you any energy back.
Yep.
My belief is that kinesthetically is how you should always train everyone for the street. You've got to feel the motion, feel the actions, feel the fear a little bit to comprehend it. And one of the best examples of that is if I asked you a question, what's one thing in riding a bike that can't be taught? What do you think it is?
The balance momentum, I guess, the feeling of staying up.
Yeah, balance. And if I said the same thing to you again, what's one thing in swimming that can't be taught?
Yeah, floating.
That's right. So all these things have to be acquired through feeling, not by anyone telling you. You can tell someone, oh yeah, that's why you have training wheels on push bikes and floaties for kids that swim, because you need to feel it to acquire it. But the wonderful thing about that kinesthetic training is once you acquire it, you never forget it, because you can ride a bike at the age of 6 and you can be 60 and never ridden a bike since. You might be a bit wobbly, but guess what? I guarantee you'll get on that bike and ride it straight away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Same with swimming. So really, reality-based stuff should be exactly the same. If you're used to the attack, if you're used to this violence and so on, then in turn, then you never forget how to respond to it. You don't respond to things by doing rote learning exercises. It's like, when you hear people doing sensitivity training, I really disagree with that. I know there's probably a lot of people out there probably, oh my God, how dare he? But the fact is that sensitivity training is fantastic. This tactile awareness thing is fantastic to do while you're relaxed and working with another guy and so on. But when someone's shouting at you or they just smacked you in the mouth, the gross motor skills are huge. You're not going to have any tactile sensitivity. It's just not going to occur. And so it really is understanding that. And a drill that I like to use when guys get a little bit adept is what I call the wall drill. And what I do is I line up, say, 20 guys, 10 on the wall, 10 off the wall. Now, the guys on the wall can't leave the wall, and they put their hands up, they put the gloves on, they just start sparring each other like kickboxing, basically. And as they're doing so, they rotate in a circular fashion. And they do the rounds 1 minute on, 20 seconds off, 1 minute on, 20 seconds off, and they beat the living hell out of each other, basically. When I see someone having difficulty, especially when they've got their back against the wall, because that really scares a lot of people. They've got no forward or backward movement now. No backward movement. All they can do now is move forward. Um, I usually stand beside them, put my hand on their shoulder and go, keep fighting, I'm with you. And so it's quite amazing how people can increase their ability, that kinesthetic ability to fight under pressure when you are there with them. So you become a helping hand to them. After you do this a few times, next thing you stand beside them, and next thing you know, you just shout at them from a distance, and they acquire these skills. So this is just a quick example of some of the things you can do to acquire that type of ability.
Yeah, one thing that I've always admired about your teaching style is that you have a way of grounding people. I remember distinctly. I think the first seminar, perhaps the first one I think I saw you teach was in Sydney, and I think we're doing an edge weapons. Either there's an edge weapons seminar, or we're doing an edge weapons component anyway. And before you started, everyone was kind of mucking around doing their own knife stuff, and some of it was flowery, and some people were kind of playing. And you came in, and I won't repeat exactly what you said, but it basically made it very clear that we're about to talk about a very serious subject matter, and that if you're going to fuck around, you're going to get dead. So yeah, let's get back to reality a little bit if we're talking about a knife. And I think that's an element that's missed. I think sometimes in our quest to make everything sort of commercially viable and to make sure people are enjoying training, we sometimes rob them of the reality and the real consequences of getting it wrong.
Yeah, of course. And look, I think a good example of that is when I see people trying to do exercises that's going to simulate combat. I saw a post on your Facebook managing violence thing where one of the guys asked, what's a great breathing exercises to get ready for the street? And we're hyperventilating, and then we're going out there and sparring each other. And look, I suppose that's not a bad idea. But when I hear things like that, it's like, when you see these people, they get people doing push-ups and sit-ups and running, and then they put the gloves on, like, let's spar. And this simulates a fight when you're running out of puff. Man, it doesn't simulate anything. My honest opinion is that, what a street encounter is, what reality-based self-defense is, the first 10 seconds of your life. That's what it is.
Yeah.
You've got 10 seconds is all you've got. You need to make the choice. Are you going to be the sheep, or are you going to be the shepherd? Are you going to be the follower, or are you going to be the leader? In that situation, you've got to make your choice. You hear a lot of people, saying, "Oh no, block this and block that, and you can cover this and recover." You can't do any of that when you're under stress. A great example of that would have to be probably recently the Conor McGregor and the Cowboy Cerrone fight.
Yeah.
Now, Conor McGregor came out and attacked him full on, went nuts, and put Donald Cerrone into a defensive mindset. And then from then on, Donald could not come out of it. And in a street fight, I will tell you now, that defensive mindset can get you killed. If to go from an offensive mindset to defensive mindset and back to an offensive mindset, you can do that. But to go from a defensive mindset to an offensive mindset while you're under stress is very, very difficult. It's like this when you box, okay, Joe? It's like if I get you in a corner and I start beating the living hell out of you and you just cover up, and after a while, after 2 or 3 hits, you start saying to yourself, man, if I pop my head up, he's going to kill me, this bloke. So then you keep covering up. Then you start turning your back. You start putting your head down and whatever. And in the end, it's too late. That defensive mindset can put an end to you.
Mm-hmm.
My belief when you're training with attacks, if you haven't responded after the first strike, you're in trouble. If you haven't responded after the second strike, you're in trouble. If you haven't responded after the third strike, man, you're in deep shit. I mean, you'll come to the end. So you really only have those first 2 motions for you to start responding to someone. Otherwise, that defensive mindset kicks in so quickly that you won't be able to get out of it.
Yeah, I think there's so much to be said for being on the offense, even if you are, from a witness's point of view or from a tactics point of view, you appear to act reactively or defensively. If mentally you're on the offense and you're looking for it and you're waiting for it and you know exactly what you're going to do as soon as the cue arrives, it makes a huge difference to if you're blindsided or you're in denial for the first couple of seconds.
Yeah. Look, I suppose it probably comes across that I'm very big on the physical side of training. And one of the main reasons why, like I said, is because of my background, my upbringing and so on. And also because of my inability to have great breathing capabilities. But the fact is that I just noticed that when it comes to street fights, people that responded quickly were the ones that survived. The ones that stayed back and waited for an opportunity tended to lose. And it's, the old, he who hesitates is lost mentality. And I think you really do have to train yourself. There's a thing that happens to us. Whenever someone grabs us, pushes us, or punches us, we hold our breath. If only for a split second, but we hold our breath.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the main reasons why you might see two big, muscly, super fit-looking bouncers will drag some skinny little guy out of a nightclub, and then he's outside screaming and shouting and wants to fight both of them, and the two bouncers are sitting there going, like they've just done an aerobic workout, because in the period of time for them trying to quickly grab him while he's squirming everywhere and walking him out, they probably haven't even had a good gulp of oxygen into their system.
That was one of the most confusing things for me when I started bouncing was, I came in already, I was already on the Australian judo team. I thought I was in decent shape. I could certainly hold my own grappling for extended periods of time with skilled people, and I thought I'd be fine. And the first time I had a 20 or 30 second tussle with a big Tongan on a dance floor, I was gasping for air and I couldn't figure out why I was in such bad shape all of a sudden. And it was the emotional stress.
Yeah. And the fact is that you're not breathing. So there's really no way, because of the autonomic system which controls a lot of your breathing, you can't train breathing in a street fight. I don't care what anyone says, but you can train it normally in everyday training. So my rule of thumb has always been the anaerobic training is for the fight and aerobic training is for the recovery. So that's why I do a mixture of the two slightly, where I'll do a minute round and I'll give the guys a 20-second break. Now, the more aerobically fit you are, the quicker you recover. The more anaerobically fit you are, the more high intensity you can put in that short period of time against your assailant. So I think when people are training for a lot of these fights, you get people running for miles and doing, they do a 3-minute round of boxing bag and the trainer goes, mate, you do a 4-minute round. And I find that absolutely ridiculous. I'd rather have someone do 3 1-minute rounds on a bag and have a 15 or 20-second break in between each 1 minute, because I know that in that 1 minute, they're going to punch the living hell out of that bag and give 110%. But I tell you what, if they're doing a 4-minute round, I know they're probably going to do the first 1 or 2 minutes hard, then they're going to coast for 30 or 40 seconds, and then they might go hard again, they're going to go back and they're going to coast again. And that doesn't make any sense for a street fight, where a street fight is a sprint. It's not a 800-meter run. It's not a marathon. It's a sprint. That's why sprinters go on your mark, set, go. They gulp air, and at the end they're all out of breath because they don't breathe the whole time they've done that 100 meters.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. I did a seminar with Hicks and Gracie a couple of years back, and he said very much the same thing. He thinks that breathing is probably the most neglected part of training for fighting, and the whole seminar was about self-defense or fighting or challenge matches. It wasn't about sport jiu-jitsu. And he said that the breathing is the most important part of his training.
It is 100%. And you can't do it while you're fighting. So it's silly when you're trying to create drills with breathing. What you want to be doing, you want to be doing it in your off time. Build up your anaerobic capacity, your oxygen debt, which is really what you want, and build up your aerobic capacity in your free time. When you're fighting, practice combat, and do it in short spurts. Real short spurts, because that's what it's all about, and trying to be as explosive as possible. I mean, there's some fantastic books out there on physical training, but to be honest with you really do need to train like a sprinter, not like a marathon runner, like a sprinter. Because when I hear people tell me, oh yeah, man, I had a street fight and I went for 15 minutes, they'll go, oh my God. So we go, man, he must be tough. I go, he must be a shit-house street fighter. This fight went on for 15 minutes. What the hell was he doing?
Those two blokes that are desperately hoping someone breaks it up soon.
Yeah, exactly. Who the hell is a fight like that? If my fight went any longer than 20 seconds, I was in trouble, let alone 15 bloody minutes. My God, was he a kung fu master?
Right, the only fights I ever saw that went longer than about 3 or 4 minutes is because someone was tangled in someone else's hair and couldn't let go.
How true is that? Or someone pulled the shirt over the other bloke's head.
It's stuck.
Yeah. So when you see things like that, it's a concern. So I think personal defense training should be always be very explosive. I think it has to have an emotional component. And I think you need to never, ever feel comfortable. I find now that a lot of reality-based training I see, and don't get me wrong, I've seen a lot of their seminars and I watch the guys on YouTube, and all I see is this master-slave arrangement where the reality guy is just beating the living hell out of people and grabbing people's faces and flipping them down. Everyone goes, "Oh my God, that's fantastic." You know, I think it's got to be the exact opposite. I think it's got to be give and take. I think all your training, all your drills have to be, you give, he hits, you come back, and so on. Respond, respond, respond. And it has to be as violent as possible within a safety region. You're never going to get right to the street fight, but you get as close as possible.
Mm.
And I think, look, and I'm going to upset all the Bruce Lee fans here, but I think at one stage, I think Bruce Lee said, how you train is how you react. And I'm going to turn and say, well, that's not really true, because how you train is how you react is only real if you train in the exact same conditions that you're going to run into. And that doesn't mean that you sit there and box and do focus mitt pad work. That's not a street fight. It's like when you see people demonstrating technique on a person, on the dummy, and then the dummy gets belted and they go, "Oh my God, look how quick and powerful he was." And then he goes, "Okay," and they go to the focus mitts. And he opens the focus mitt and the guy holds focus mitts like he's a boxer. And it's ridiculous. That shouldn't be the case. You need to create drills that are going to be as realistic as possible and as explosive as well, with a component of you being hit while doing the actual combination, because that's what's really going to happen to you.
Spot on. It's such a it's an area that I agree with you. I mean, the reality based systems, they're all going the same direction that that traditional martial arts went in, which was, we
100%.
we have to attract clients, right? Because I've said many times on the show that if a martial arts goes extinct now, it's because they can't keep the lights on, not because their warriors are being killed in battle.
Yeah.
So everyone's trying to find a way to appeal to the mass, the mass demographic, and the way you do that is through really cool looking YouTube clips, not necessarily through much substance. And and it's the exact same thing as the Taekwondo and karate schools adding flashy colors. And we started off, the reality based system started off criticizing traditional martial arts for that, and now going down the exact same path, because at the end of the day, it worked. So yeah,
I think you've got to take into account. You've got to look at martial arts in general, right? If you looked at the martial arts that seem to have the most success, and without using MMA as an example, because that's just quite obvious, that's a mixture of a lot of these. But if you look at boxing, boxers have this unerring ability to be able to handle themselves in the street as well as in the ring, most of them. But the fact is that the training is very, very kinesthetic, very, very touch and go, tap, tap, hitting each other all the time. You find that wrestling is the same. You find that BJJ is the same, but not all BJJ. I've noticed that BJJ lately seems to be changing, where it seems to be people showing a mass amount of techniques, but not really doing any actual grappling. So
there's definitely been a big shift in BJJ the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. And judo is the same as well. Judo can be fantastic to do, but I've noticed judo change a little bit into that as well, where it become, as it became an Olympic sport, basically people started doing the techniques and not necessarily actually doing the throws, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so on. So, and kickboxing is another one. The thing with these is that they're doing contact right from the beginning to the end. There's none of this. And in boxing, look, I love it. Like still see the reality-based guys doing it. They go throw a punch at me, and someone throws this mediocre, slow-ass punch at them or kick at them. But mate, I tell you, if you get a boxer, and I train with professional boxers on a regular basis, I'm telling you, you get a boxer, you say, "Hey, mate, throw a jab at me," he'll throw that fucking jab at you at 100 miles an hour and punch you in the face. They throw a right hand will come at you ahead of 1,000,000 miles an hour. They don't know what slow motion punching means. Only martial artists know that. So if you're going to do a defense against those punches, my God, man, you want to be sharp or you're going to get hit. But but I see it in reality-based stuff now. People throwing slow punches. You grab me, and the guy grabs. He doesn't really grab you. He doesn't grab me, smash him up against the wall, and so on. It's a totally different thing. And I think we've lost the sense of what realism is about. We don't want to injure each other, but there are ways of training. And unfortunately, on a podcast, I can't demonstrate. I must admit, I am a very hands-on person. I like to demonstrate by doing things, not very telling things, you know. But that's really the area we should be looking into, going down that path and trying to find things that are applicable to what we do, whether it's our job or not. You know, you got to also understand the emotions of people and also the psychology of it. Most first responders are great people. They're people that want to help other people. That's what they are. Even the local thug bouncer sometimes is a great first responder because in his own sense, he actually does want to help people. It's not just a job to him, you know. The unfortunate thing about first responders is that so many of them are third-person personalities. And what I mean by that is it's great. They don't mind jumping in and defending the people and breaking the fights up and helping them as long as the threat is not onto them personally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you see that happen quite often with police and security on a regular basis, where you see them jump in, they break the fight up, you think, man, these guys are machines. And then all of a sudden the guy turns on one of the bouncers and the bouncer just drops it because now the threat's on him.
Yeah, now it's a personal threat. Yep.
That's it. And I see a lot of that. So I think you really do need to take that into consideration when you're doing your training as well. You know, what are these people? I'll give you a bouncing drill I use with my guys. Now, to give the listeners out there a bit of a background on me, I have been very fortunate over the years that we've got, my wife and I have developed 3 companies that we have. And we've got probably close on around about nearly 400 staff members. The security business is doing over 100 plus venues throughout the state and also interstate now. So the advantage I have is I get to see videotapes pretty much every week. Like this morning, I was going through half a dozen of them incidents from the weekend that just went on. And I get to see things that really happen. So in some ways you could say when you do have that information coming on a regular basis, you become a fact-based trainer because you get to see what really goes on in a fight, not what you think goes on a fight. And I see what techniques people throw and what techniques people don't throw and how people react. So one of the bouncing drills I developed so I could see whether these guys were a third person mentality as a first responder was that I would get 2 guys in the middle of the mat and I'd put focus mitts on their hands, both of them. And I'd get them to beat the hell out of each other, slapping each other, these big swings of the body and head. I'd get 4 guys around them and I'd say, you 4 are the security. And what I'm going to tell you to do is that on my command, you're going to run in there and you're going to break that fight up. And I want you to control and restrain them, pull them apart and take them to the ground, do what you have to do, but just get them apart so that they stop fighting. Now, before this happens, I've secretly told the 2 guys that are actually beating the hell out of each other, the focus mitts at the moment, that as soon as one of these guys grab you, I want you to turn on them and start beating the shit out of them. So it's quite amazing to watch. I would have 4 guys run in, and you might find out of the 4 that 3 of them will do the job and 1 will fail dismally because once the threat turns on him, he falls apart. Sometimes it's 3 will fall apart and 1 will only be successful. But it's a great drill to check that mentality, see what that person does while under threat. And the great thing about that, you never, ever truly get to see a person's true inner self or their personality until they are under threat or under stress. You hear people being married for 20 years and they have financial troubles and say the wife leaves. Well, that shows me that that solidarity was never there in the first place. So, you know, when you see people under stress and if they can still handle it and keep going, well, man, you know exactly where you stand with that person. So it's a good drill and it's a great drill to practice. And I'll tell you, mate, the success rate's quite amazing because you'll get, man, I did a class only just prior to Christmas and I think we had about 80 guys on the floor doing this. And I would say out of 80, I would probably say it was almost 50-50 of who were first responders and first personalities, and the others would have been third person. It's quite amazing to watch.
Yeah, and you know what? It's something that's changed in the crowd control industry, especially the security industry more broadly, where previously, you know, when people like yourself were getting into it, nearly everyone came into bouncing because they were already kind of a rough nut, and they'd probably already been in a few fights. And now it's a much different demographic. It's a bunch of students. It's, you know, people that have never come from conflict. So for someone like you who's employing them, Do you have any sort of tips for people that perhaps the listeners out there haven't had a background of conflict because they've had good fortune to
Yep.
to not have had that life, and good for them, but they want to be more mentally and emotionally prepared? How do you go about equipping someone like that?
Mate, I would tell it is quite simple. I would tell them to get themselves a customer service job somewhere. You get a kid that's worked at McDonald's, and I guarantee you he's copped a bit of abuse every now and then because he's giving you the wrong amount of bloody pickles on your burger, or you didn't give me the cheese, you motherfucker. Bloody where's my cheese? So I think customer service is a big thing for people to learn. If they can handle that and still control their emotions, that's a good plus. Because everyone will turn on the customer service guy because they think he's not going to do anything to them. How dare you touch it? I'm the customer. That type of mentality, yeah? The other thing is too, don't be afraid to make a decision and stand by it. I notice these days a lot of people are very indecisive in their thinking. They think of the consequences before they think of the act. And I think that can be a damning thing when it comes to security or even policing, because that could be a life or death situation in that area. Yeah. So I think probably that type of training, and also too, like I told you earlier. Well, we'll give you a good example. If you're bothered by being hit, one of the best things to do is a drill that I get the guys to do. Like I mentioned before, I actually get two guys and I give them to wear focus mitts, not gloves, focus mitts. I get them to stand with each other, and I get them to stand there, and I get them to hit each other to the body and hit each other head with these left and right hooks. Rips to the body, hooks to the head. No uppercuts, no jabs, no straight punches, just swings, just like in a normal fight. And I get them to spar. Now, when you do that, you can actually get male and female, young and old, experienced and inexperienced can spar each other, and no one gets hurt. It makes a big loud impact, and it's the noise that scares people more than anything else, but the impact is really dissipated. So there's no real major injuries. From that next step, what I do then is I actually put one on the wall with his back to the wall and one facing him so he can't come off the wall. And that way then that puts him into a corner and they have to fight from there. That's the next. And then the third step is I have this contraption with two straps on where I actually tie the guys together with a rope link in between where they're within arm's reach, the old WAR, within assault range, it's war time.
Yep.
Once they're in that distance, and then I get them to spar then so they can't leave each other. And to extend that, what I do is I let them spar like that for a minute with a 20-second break, and I keep the strap on them. So in the end, they get so sick of each other, it's quite amazing to watch. They'll actually turn their backs on each other because they can't stand looking at each other. So, and I'll do that for countless rounds. And in the end, they get so hot and they're so out of puff, they're sick of breathing in the other guy's dirty ass oxygen. So they turn around trying to get fresh air. And the first thing they do after so many rounds, they go, "Please, can you let us go? Can we do it without the connection?" I go, "No." So that's another way of fighting within the space. From there, all I do is add gloves.
Mm.
And mate, you'd be amazed. And you turn that wimp into a warrior in a very, very short period of time. Because sometimes it's the act that scares them rather than the actual punch. It's the fear of the punch that scares them. It's really funny. I love using this quote. It's the anticipation of death is worse than death itself. Everyone goes, "Oh my God, where did that come from? Did that come from the Dao De Ching, or did that come from the samurais?" I go, "No, it actually came from Steven Seagal." But in one of his movies, and they'll go, "You're kidding me." I go, "No, I'm not kidding you." But it really denotes really what it's all about is understanding that mentality for that. Yeah.
That's some really good drills too, because it sort of incrementally gets someone, sort of tiptoe the foot in the water and then getting them wading in the water before you start throwing them in the deep end. I think sometimes the old school mentality of just throw them in there and spar and they'll figure it out it's not great for developing people, especially if your goal is to actually make them better, not to weed them out.
Yeah. Also, I think another thing you want to be very careful of, I love military training. I think military training is great. And a lot of my stuff, a lot of people say, is very much like military training. I'm very much the screaming staff sergeant that gives it to everybody, But there's one thing that I don't think is good is that you don't want to fatigue people and then make them do things. Like I said earlier on, I see a lot of people and I know these guys are going to hate me, but say a lot of people within the Krav Maga thing and so on, and some of these other reality-based stuff, where they get people, like I mentioned earlier, fatigue them, get them to push-ups and sit-ups, and then they spar them and beat the hell out of them. I went through that stage in the 80s and I thought it was a great idea. Then I started to realize that it actually had detrimental effects on people. It didn't help them at all. It made them disciplined. It created the camaraderie among the guys. It did do that, but it didn't help them when they were by themselves. If anything, it's the old story, and I think you probably would have heard this from Blair, and that would have been. It's amazing to hear these stories of people diving into the water to save a drowning child, and then once they save that child, the person themselves drowns. And the reason why is that third person again. You're doing whatever you can, and then when the threat's on you, you can't handle it. And I find that's what happens when you do a lot of that military sort of type training. In a group, they're super strong, but individually, they end up becoming quite weak. They give up because it gets too hard. I think you really do need to train the individual, and each individual is slightly different, and you have to be aware of that. Even when you are shouting and giving instructions, you need to find things that motivate people. What's going to get the best from them? But drills are the way to go, as long as the drill is as real as possible. The other point I want to make too is that there's another famous martial artist out there called Benny the Jet. He loves to quote a thing called "knowledge is power," and I think that's 110% true. But the problem with that is that knowledge in itself is not power. Knowledge is the vehicle to attain power. So the saying is not totally correct. I see all these people that go and they get all these certifications, they do all these seminars, they train on all these different arts, but it doesn't mean anything. They've gained all this knowledge, but unless they're utilizing it on a daily basis, actually working it and using it forcefully, it's pointless. It's like putting fuel into an engine. If it's the right fuel in the engine will succeed and you'll get power. But if you put the wrong fuel in the engine or no fuel at all, then the engine's never going to go anywhere. But you'll still have the knowledge of how the engine works. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I see a lot of modern martial artists being like that now. Especially all these reality-based guys. They say, "Oh yeah, I bounced for 6 months at a particular club, and that gives me the right to teach you this." Well, no, that's not true at all. He only walk away with what he got from that 6 months, but 6 months is not enough. It has to be a lifetime experience. You really have to, like, I hate to say this, but I've been involved in half a dozen fatalities in my career, and each one of them has been absolutely horrific and frightened the living hell out of me, and it has really, really opened my eyes up to a lot of situations, especially with people I was working with. Now, I'll give you an example. I've worked with some really, really hard men. Great guys, and they're big dudes. Like, I'm not a big guy. I'm like 5'10" and a half, 5'11". Like I weigh probably a good fighting weight now for me would be probably around about 100 kilos, and that's about it. But these guys are big men, 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", 120, 130 kilos, and they could fight. I had a mate of mine, big dude, fighting, man. I saw him take on like half a dozen guys, and I just go, man, this guy's a machine. Yet we all have a breaking point, the fear point that bothers us the most, the stress point. And that's something we need to always find out within each other. And when there was a fatality and he was involved in it with me, he fell the water. He completely fell apart. And I was quite shocked. I was calm and he fell apart. But I'd seen this guy fighting to the death with people, you know what I mean? But in that situation, that was the end of him. I've seen other people where they've done fantastic and they've done really good. And then one day some guys pulled a weapon and that's it. That's the breaking point, the weapon. I saw a guy, I've seen him fight guys. I've seen him, I've seen someone trying to run him over in a car and I saw him jump out, pull the guy out of the car and beat the hell out of him and all kinds of things. Yet the day this young little guy pulled a knife on him, and it was only a pocket knife, he completely fell apart and curled up in a corner. And I think if someone hadn't stepped in, I'm pretty sure he just would have become a victim. So it's quite amazing to see these really super hard men sometimes. You find it where their hard points are. We all have it. We all have that chink in our armor. So our training should be based on trying to find out what that chink is, what that chink in our armor is, and developing that more so than anything else. Developing your strengths, that's absolutely pointless. If you're a great offensive fighter, then you really do need to practice your defense and practice that ability to be able to be defensively offensive. And that's really what you should be trying to work on. So, yeah.
Yeah, those are really good points. And I think probably that you touched on a little bit of the aftermath. I think it's probably the thing that's probably the most under-taught these days. There's more and more people that are now doing the, the preemptive or the prior to the incident behavioral cues and recognition and managing stress and situational awareness and all that kind of stuff, which I think is brilliant. But no one really touches on the aftermath, and I think that's the next frontier. I actually just did a long chat with Mark McYoung, talking about the legal aftermath, and I think the emotional and psychological side of that as well is probably something that in the future we need to start addressing a little bit more.
Well, mate, to be honest with you, I've been covering it for years, and that's being honest. And I'm not telling stories. I think I was probably the first one ever to run an edge weapon class and course where I actually incorporated first aid. And I don't remember anyone ever doing it. Now,
it seems like such a no-brainer, doesn't it? I mean, you're going to be teaching people how to deal with knives. You should be teaching them how to patch themselves up.
Yeah, 100%. I was really fortunate. We actually had one of the guys that was training with me at the time when I was about 19 or 20 was a medical student. And so I thought to myself, well, like if we're going to be learning how to use knives and batons and getting busted up and so on and fighting, we should really learn how to heal ourselves, if we need be, perform some type of medical procedure. So that's when I started. And like I said, that was like, 30 plus, 38 years ago when, we started incorporating it. So I've heard a few people do it now, but I actually mentioned it in Blitz magazine once. I said that if you're doing a knife edge course and you don't have a first aid component to it, then you shouldn't be teaching it, because it's so important that a cut or just a single stab wound can kill you. And if you don't know how to treat it, you're going to die. And you need to learn how to use, what can I say, first aid without a bandage. You need to learn how to rip your shirt, use your credit card, use a piece of plastic, pick up a leaf. You know what I mean? You need to learn things in the environment that you can press on there and keep that wound from you bleeding out. So you need to learn all that type of stuff. And that's the thing I found. And then the aftermath thing was the thing that we got into, especially when I started opening up my business with security. I noticed that so many guys would, the old rape and pillage thing that happens in the old days where people would, attack each other in armies and battles. I can relate to that because, and you would too, because I know you've done a bit of security work. But after a big punch on, you had a big all-in punch on, man, you want to hit your chest like a gorilla. You want to do the high fives because you just punched on and almost lost it, and there you are. Now, guys will do things. I'm probably going to upset a few of your listeners here a little bit. I don't mean to sound crass or rude, but usually afterwards, security guys either, smoke a bit of something to calm them down, or they have a drink to calm them down, or they go and maybe have a bit of a rendezvous with the barmaid to calm them down. The fact is that a lot of people don't take into account, yet security and policing have a high preponderance of suicide and a lot of, and almost like the PTSD as everyone else does, especially security. I've lost 4 very good friends of mine. Suicide, to the point where it becomes very stressful for them. They're working in really hard-ass pubs and a lot of stress, a lot of threats, a lot of everything, and it's very, very hard to keep it together. So when we are training our people these days, I spend a lot of time talking to them, especially a lot of young guys. Talking about how to act, how to respond, and if you feel this way, to contact someone. I think it's a very important part which a lot of people forget. And when I'm teaching my personal defense stuff, defensive tactics, I'm very, very big on that with also my guys. I tell them, you need to do this. You need to get this prepared. If you're feeling this way, this is what this means. So you need to follow up on it. So, yeah, it really is an underrated aspect that a lot of people have never covered. And, it's quite weird. It's another thing I'd like to say too is I think another form of training, which a lot of people tend to forget, is training techniques. I think a lot of techniques that people train for self-defense are incorrect. Out of 40 years of bouncing, I will tell you now, and I'm going to upset the Kung Fu people again. I can't help myself for these days. I'm on a roll. But I've never seen a palm strike in 40 years in a street fight. I've never seen anyone use one. I've never seen anyone hit by one. Never. Now, I've looked at videotapes left, right, and center from incidents at pubs, and I still haven't seen a palm strike. I see a lot of slaps. Slapping is very prevalent. Headbutting, biting, pulling hair. I've never seen any raking of the face or eyes. I've only ever seen maybe the eye gouge. If they tackle a guy at the ground, they start trying to gouge his eye out if they're hanging onto him in a bit of a choke or something. I've seen fish hooking, hair pulling. What else are they? Biting. I've never seen a groin kick ever. I've seen knees to the groin, but I've never seen a groin kick as such. I've seen leg kicks. I've never seen an instep, that oblique kick that people.
Yeah,
I've never
stop
seen one of them.
kicking. Yep, yep.
I've never seen one of them in a street fight. I've seen a toe kick in a street fight to someone's shin.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, and then football kicking people while they're on the ground. I've seen front kicks. I've rarely seen a side kick. Rarely seen a spinning kick. I've seen a shitload of flying kicks, especially when you're in the working in clubs in the Asian community. All these guys are flying through the air. But flying kicks work when you jump into a crowd, knock a few people over. So
It's amazing if you don't care who you hit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I've seen that. But so a lot of the techniques that I see a lot of these reality-based guys teaching, I think are really wasted effort in sometimes because they're just not used. And I did an experiment once at a seminar. I had about 60 odd people there. And before I started, I said to them, what I want you to do, I want you to walk up to any of these bags or whatever here, and I want you to strike them as hard as you can with the strike that you believe is going to save your life or your family. And they all looked at me a bit perplexed. And I said, look, anything you want. I don't care what it is. You're flying upside down, spinning headbutt, anything you want, do it. Now, this 60 people was probably, I would have to say, probably about 40 men and about 20 odd girls. I was amazed. I saw hammer fists. I saw headbutts. I saw elbows. I saw knees. I saw front kicks. I saw round kicks. I saw every punch you could think of. But I never saw a palm strike. I never saw a chop. I never saw anything like that at all. And it was quite surprising because it makes you realize that when people are in that sense of anger and that power motion, that they naturally always go to a closed fisted type strike. If you ever watch some of these things on YouTube, and I love watching them when you see the BJJ competition and they're wrestling and they don't like the decision, what do? They get up and they start punching each other.
Yeah.
I find it hilarious. No one does any submissions. They roll into the crowd. No one. They just all fall into the ground and punch shit out of each other.
Yeah.
And you watch wrestlers. You watch the American wrestlers out there, and they're in amateur wrestling over in America. Suddenly they don't like the decision, or the other guy palms into the head too hard. Next thing you know, bang, it's on. They start swinging punches, and they're throwing kicks and everything. I find it hilarious. So I think a lot of reality-based people spend a lot of time practicing techniques that are probably never, ever going to be used. A thing with human nature, and look, I'm not a psychologist. I'm only going by my experience. So any of the listeners out there that want to denigrate what I say, go for your life if you've got the knowledge. But as far as I'm concerned, my own personal knowledge from it all is that the technique that you've had the most success with first in your life is the technique that you will use if you've come to the end, you've got no other choice. So you can do BJJ all your life, but if you've knocked someone out in your past before you did BJJ with a big right hand to the chin, I guarantee you anything, when you get into trouble and you really think this is the end, you've got no other choice, you're going to throw that big right hand. I mean, it just seems to be a natural thing that most people do. If you had success with a kick, there's a good chance that when you get into trouble, you're going to throw that kick, especially if you've had success with it. It's quite amazing to see.
Yeah, I'll vouch for what you said about the palm strikes too, because I was a big palm strike aficionado. I thought from a purely logical point of view, the palm strike makes a lot of sense. You avoid having broken hands. You don't have the issues with the fight bites. All this stuff seemed to make sense. And you can generate power if you train it well enough. But what I found is that when it was real, I never threw one. And you start to realize that, and it changed the way I was teaching too, because I always used to teach palm strikes over closed fist punching. And then I thought, well, if people are going to throw the closed fist punch anyway, then we need to teach them how to actually punch with a closed fist without breaking their hand, or at least minimizing the chances of doing it. So
most women, when they get under stress, when they punch, they tend to hammer fist naturally.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to throw hammer fists. It's a real natural thing for a lot of women and a lot of kids. They just naturally throw hammer fists rather than a straight punch. They door knock with their punches, as they call it. Well, with the palm strike, I always say to everyone, go on YouTube, and I suppose YouTube is probably about 20% reality when you look at it. I mean, as far as stats are concerned, if you're trying to get some type of evidence up for any type of thesis. But You go on there, you can't find a video of anyone doing a palm strike for real in a fight. I mean, a lot of people demonstrating it, but no one actually doing it. And I find it quite funny that here we have this medium that's all over the world that we could use at any time, and we have our phones, but no one ever does a palm strike. It just doesn't happen.
I'm going to launch a challenge. If you're listening to this and you find a video of a palm strike knockout, just send it to the show, because I'll pass it on to Deane.
I'd like to see it. Now, listen, a lot of people say, yeah, but I've used palm strikes. And I say, well, that's great, but show me the money. Show me the fucking money. I mean, if you've used a palm strike, well, show me the evidence. You know what I mean? If you've hit someone and knocked them out and you've gone to court, well, show me the court papers so I can see that's what you did. But until then, I must admit, I've just never seen it. And I must admit, a palm strike is very, very hard to train someone to gain power. It takes a long time to generate power with it.
Yeah, it is a process.
And even when you see guys like Bas Rutten and that throwing a palm strike, even when he was fighting in Pancrase, and I know seen him on video talking about his palm strike, which is basically a slap to the side of the head, an arcing, you call it an arcing palm strike, but basically I'd call it a slap. When he was doing a straight palm strike, like a punch to someone's face, it didn't knock anyone out. It just knocked them down. You know, so I think it's one of those things. Look, I'm not saying it's a bad strike. I'm not saying that, but I just think we have to be aware that if we're training someone for the street, they don't have a lot of time. Not many people are career martial artists like what we are. So they've only got, maybe they might do an 8-week course, or they might do it for a few months, or they might do it for 12 months. But in that time, you need to get the most out of them. And as I mentioned earlier, the best way to get the most out of someone is to do everything kinesthetically. Like I said, there's three forms of learning, right? You've got audible, visual, and kinesthetic. And kinesthetic is the one that gets the best results. If you can acquire any type of skill through feeling, it's amazing. You tend to keep it forever. It's like in bodybuilding, when you're pumping weights, people say you get the pump, and you've got muscle memory. Well, it's funny, when you've pumped weights for a while and you haven't, and then you stop doing it, and then you go back to get it and you get that pump. It's almost like a motivator. You want to go do more because you've got the pump. Well, that's that kinesthetic mentality, where you've gained something, a benefit from it. And when you do that, you don't forget. I mean, that's all that comes down to. That's why we hit our children when they do something wrong. If we said, now, please, Johnny, don't go playing with the stove again. And he goes, yeah. My dad always said, he used to point to his mouth and go, 90% of the population listen to this. And he'd raise his hand up and go, but 100% listen to this. So I have to relate to that when it comes to reality. Look, I know there's a lot of people might disagree with me on that point, but the fact is that results show. I've been very fortunate. I've trained a lot of champion fighters, and I've trained a lot of people that really should never have been a champion into champions. And the reason is because, and I swear by it, that kinesthetic training. It is such a great thing. You can turn someone who's a frightened, terrified person into an absolute trained killer in a short period of time by organising your training all around that tactile, kinesthetic form of method of training someone. Yeah.
That's brilliant, mate. We're coming up on time now for the regular portion of the interview. So, for the sake of people that want to know more about you, they want to engage your services in some way, how can I get them in touch with you?
Well, mate, they can go on Facebook to our Lawler Tactical Facebook. I'm just about to adjust that. I've never really had a full-time training area. I've had a full-time training area, but I've never really had it really open to the public. We have just opened up a small little dingy shed over at Underwood in Brisbane here, which I'm opening up full-time now as a training for combatives. I'm getting at a stage now where I'd like to sort of try to do it on a regular basis. So if they contact me through Facebook on Lawler Tactical, I can answer any question. If they wish to abuse me, tell them to go right ahead. I'm quite happy about that as well.
Awesome. All right, mate. Thank you very much for that. And for our Patreon subscribers, if you head over to the patreon.com/managing violence, you'll hear the bonus questions with Deane coming right up. Thanks again to Deane for sharing his time and telling us his story and providing his thoughts on self-defense and managing violence in the broader sense. It was great to sit down and listen to Deane. As I said, I've known Deane for quite a few years. We've caught up intermittently and bumped into each other at seminars, and I'm always impressed with just his knowledge and his authenticity. And he's been a great supporter of mine, a great mentor of mine, whether he knows it or not. So it was a tremendous honor to sit down and talk with him at length. Now, if you'd like to sit down and talk with people at length, head on over to our Facebook group, which is the Managing Violence Tribe, facebook.com. Head on over, search Managing Violence Tribe, you'll see us. And if you'd like bonus content, including bonus content from this episode and all the others in Season 4 thus far, head on over to www.patreon.com/managing violence. Until next time, I'm Joe Saunders, and I'll talk to you again soon.